by an altogether different agenda, i.e. that the non-indifference it is steeped in goes in a different direction. It creates other needs, tasks and yearnings, so that the second realm, the psyche, is the realm of a different kind of non-indifference, or if you will, the realm of a different quest. Finally, given the fact that it is steeped in a different kind of non-indifference and revolves around a completely different center, this second realm Socrates' notion of psyche stands for is also characterized by a completely new arrangement of its various components, by the set of various components of reality. The realm of psyche has its own view and sets its own standards on what things are chosen over others, on what is important and on what is not, on how each thing relates to the center, to the focal point, to oneself, that is to a certain understanding of what oneself is all about. But it is set to the reigning agenda on how things define and how each thing defines itself in terms of this relation. In short, the psyche 2 stands for nothing less than everything. And this really means everything, only this time everything redefined in the light of a completely new understanding of what everything is all about. This is Socrates' main point concerning soma and psyche. One of the features of what he means by soma is the fact that the soma in this sense tends to appear absolutely without alternative, as an exclusively valid instance for understanding life or reality and oneself. Now, psyche means an alternative to this, and Socrates' psyche stands for the fact that we are not irrevocably bound to this first version of reality his notion of soma is all about. The picture can change. Life, reality, and oneself, the whole thing can turn out to be something altogether different, with a different center, a different direction of non-indifference, a different arrangement, a different everything. In short, psyche is all about the possibility of everything changing shape, and indeed changing shape beyond recognition. Thus, all in all, we can say that Socrates' soma and psyche stand for two all-embracing realms corresponding to two different perceptions, two different versions, as it were, of everything. At the risk of seeming to insult both logic and grammar and your patience, we can also say that soma and psyche stand for nothing less than two different everythings. In other words, it is a question of two conflicting pictures of it all, but it is said of two opposite understandings of the whole field of what appears to us in our conscious living. We can also express this by saying that it is as though the whole field of everything were a reversible ambiguous figure, like the well-known Rubin images. Of course, omne simile claudicat, and in this case the comparison limps mainly for two reasons. First, the reversible ambiguous figure we are talking about is not just a thing among many others, but rather nothing less than the whole field of what appears to us in our conscious living, that is, everything. And secondly, what's at stake here is not only the fact that the image in question can be interpreted in two mutually exclusive ways, one of which is completely foreign to the other, so that one sees either one way or the other, but also the fact that in this case, one of the two possible interpretations tends to remain completely out of sight, so that one interpretation is by far the more common than the other. In other words, in this case, one of the two possible interpretations tends to prevail upon the other or to eclipse the other. Thus, contrary to what happens with the Rubin image, most people spend most of their lives and even their entire life without ever experiencing the second possible perception of life and reality Socrates is talking about. So that for most people, the alternative perception of life and reality Socrates' psyche stands for either remains completely out of sight or seems to be entirely out of the question, except as pure nonsense. That is, for most people, the alternative global perception we are talking about makes its appearance, if it appears at all, only in the third or the second person, so to speak, not in the first person. And there's something utterly preposterous. But this is by no means what Socrates' psyche stands for. Psyche stands for the alternative view Socrates refers to, A, lived in the first person, and B, as the very opposite of nonsense. as the correct understanding of it all, i.e., as the way things really are. So, here again we are dealing with two points of view that are separated from each other by nothing less than what Socrates described as a legathena. In other words, so that one of them remains hidden from the other. In other words, according to Socrates, there is an either-or relation between Soma and Psyche, at least in the sense that if one belongs to the realm of Soma, one is completely blind to what things look like in the realm of Psyche. And this shows the connection between Soma and Psyche in Socrates' sense, and the preliminary dialogue between Socrates, the connection between Soma and Psyche in Socrates' sense, and the preliminary dialogue between Socrates and Simmias on death, life, and philosophy. The kind of polysemy which, as we have seen, begins to take shape in that part of the Phaedo, plays once again a pivotal role. But this time the question is not the meaning of some words or notions among many others, it has a broader scope. Socrates' point is not just that the words life, death, and philosophia, or for that matter Soma and Psyche, can carry different meanings. It is rather that in the final analysis, the polysemy between their more common meaning and the sense these words have for philosophers is rooted in an overall either-or between two competing understandings of what everything, the whole extent of what appears to us in our conscious living, is all about. At the end of the day, it is the very same polysemy, the universal polysemy, so to speak, which has to do with a very particular kind of perceptual reversal, to use once again the language of Gestalt psychology, namely a global or universal perceptual reversal, or the alternative between two competing global percepta, as it were. Put another way, the polysemy, where this at a different point of view the preliminary dialogue is all about, is a first strong indication of something much more far-reaching, this global or universal perceptual reversal, which in fact lies behind the different meanings of the words life, death, and philosophia, or for that matter, Soma and Psyche. However, as we have seen, Socrates' point is not only polysemy, but the fact that the polysemy he refers to tends to remain unnoticed. For one of the possible senses, or all senses but one, escapes notice. This holds both for the preliminary dialogue on death, life, and philosophia, and for Socrates' notion of Soma and Psyche, when he said for the overall perceptual reversal we are talking about. Here again there is an appearance of univocity. Usually we are not aware of the other possible sense, but we are not aware of the alternative global perception, the one Socrates' Psyche stands for. Socrates' notion of Soma and Psyche expresses this awareness, the awareness one usually lacks, namely the awareness that there is such a thing as a global or universal perceptual reversal, that there are at least two competing possibilities, not just one, but two opposite perceptions of what everything is all about. But to this, one may object that even granted that what Soma and Psyche stand for has to do with two realms and not with two things, and indeed with two all-embracing realms in the above-mentioned sense, the fact remains that these two realms revolve around two main focuses or central points. The reason why one of the two realms in question is the realm of Soma seems to be the fact that it revolves around the Soma. And the Soma around which this whole realm revolves turns out to be a thing, after all. The thing the whole realm is all about, namely one's own Soma in the usual sense of the word. And mutatis mutandis, much the same seems to hold good for the Psyche. For the latter is something added to the Soma, it is, in the usual sense of the word, something that can be separated from it, etc. This objection touches on the crucial point, the point upon which everything depends. If the objection proves to be justified, then it turns out that Socrates' understanding of Soma and Psyche does not differ that significantly from our usual understanding. But the point is that on closer inspection, the objection proves to be unfounded. That this is so is shown by what Socrates says at 65a 9d2 in the handout number 5. Now, what about the acquisition of wisdom, whether it's at knowledge itself? Is the Soma a hindrance or not? If a man take it with him and associating this research. What I mean is this: have the sight and hearing of man any truth in them, or is it true, as the poets are always telling us, that there is nothing accurate in what we see and in what we either see or hear? And yet, if these two of our soma-related senses are not accurate and do not make things manifest, the rest are not likely to be accurate and make things manifest, for they are all inferior to these. Do you not think so? Certainly I do, he replied. Then, said he, when does the psyche attain to truth? For when it tries to consider anything in company with the soma, it is plain that the psyche is deceived by it. True. In thought, in reason then, if at all, something of the realities something of the realities becomes manifest to it. Yes. But the psyche reasons best when there is none of these things to trouble it, to annoy it by their intrusion. Neither hearing, nor sight, nor pain, nor any pleasure, but the psyche is, so far as possible, alone by itself, and takes leave of the body, and avoiding, so far as it can, all association or contact with the body, reaches out toward reality. As is generally known, there is a parallel passage about 27 pages further down at 82d9, 83d4, in the handout number 6. How philosophers know or perceive that when philosophia takes their psyche under its care, their psyche is bound fast to the soma and glued fast to it, and forced to take its view of real things through the soma as through the walls of a dungeon, instead of alone by itself, and wallowing in every kind of ignorance. How philosophers then, I say, know or perceive that philosophia, having taken their psyche under its care when it is in this condition, encourages it gently and endeavors to set it free, pointing out that all observation by the eyes is full of illusion, deceit, and equally so that by the ears and the other senses, and urging it to withdraw from these, except insofar as it is absolutely obliged to employ them, and exhorting it to collect and concentrate itself into itself, and to trust nothing except itself, and that portion of real reality in and by itself which the psyche can apprehend in and by itself. But whatsoever it sees by different organs varying in various things, to hold none of that to be true, but that everything of that kind is visible and apprehended by the senses, whereas the psyche itself sees that which is apprehended by thought and invisible. Unquote. Space does not allow us to discuss these lines in detail, but the point is that they repeat and reinforce the main ideas of the passage I have just quoted from 62. The question is, of course, to determine how what Socrates says in these two passages calls into question the usual understanding according to which A, both soma and psyche are things among many other things, and B, pretty much applies to what Socrates calls soma and psyche. Let us take a closer look into this question. First of all, it must be kept in mind that Socrates does mention the usual understanding of soma as a thing among many other things. As a matter of fact, the thing in question, the soma as a thing among many others, plays a major role in the global perceptum, the overall view of everything, his new notion of soma stands for. And what is more, Socrates mentions two major roles played by the soma, nota bene by the soma as a thing among many other things. On the one hand, as pointed out above, one soma, the care of the services of one soma, hipito soma therapeia, etc., etc., is the main thing. The focal point of non-indifference, the center around which everything else revolves. On the other hand, the soma, nota bene the thing among other things this word usually stands for, is supposed to be the center of perception, the location of perception, the place where all perception occurs. Socrates' remarks tacitly assume that it is the thing through which and in which everything else appears or manifests itself. In a word, Socrates points out that everything else is soma-related and soma-centered in a variety of ways, and this soma-related and soma-centered understanding of everything else is what his new notion of soma is all about. But the question is, what, after all, is this thing, soma? According to Socrates, it is a component of this very view of things, this perception of it all, that he most emphatically disqualifies by saying that it is a hindrance, empodion, to knowledge, that there is nothing accurate than akribes in it, that it does not make things manifest, that it does not attain truth, that is to truth, that is said to reality, that it is full of illusion or deceit, apatis men meston, that the psyche is deceived by it, exapatata hypautu, that the psyche is forced to take its view of real things through the soma as through the walls of a dungeon, hosperdia redmu, or that it makes one wallow in every kind of ignorance, en passe amathia culindaistai. A more devastating assessment of its cognitive quality is hardly conceivable. The very medium in which whatever appears does so is called into question, and everything appearing through the soma or in the soma is declared to belong to a very imperfect kind of manifestation, which at the same time hides, masks, and distorts its own object. In short, according to Socrates, the whole realm of our soma-related perceptor is a realm of lack of aletheia, a realm of pretended truth, a mere pretense, and indeed in such a way that in the final analysis it is out of touch with reality, utterly divorced from it. It is not the place to discuss on what grounds Socrates makes this claim, whether these grounds are adequate to support such a claim, etc. This is of course a decisive question, but space does not allow us to go into detail about this. At any rate, the point is A, that Socrates does make this claim. He states in black and white that the whole thing, the whole usual soma-related perception of reality is mistaken, a misunderstanding or a cognitive misconstrual, and B, that this claim, namely the claim that all soma-related percepta lack aletheia and have nothing whatsoever to do with real knowledge, is an essential component of his characterization of soma. This blanket devaluation of the cognitive quality of all soma-related perception makes a world of difference. Socrates questions the validity of soma-related perception, not only in this or that aspect, but from start to finish. That is, Socrates' devaluation affects everything in it, what we have termed the global perception, the whole view of everything, i.e. not only to mention a few, its whole perception of what everything is all about, the kind of non-difference it is steeped in, the center around which everything else revolves, the way in which everything else defines itself by its relation to this center, etc. Each and every component of the soma-related perception is challenged and contaminated, so to speak, by this blanket devaluation of its cognitive value. Each and every component is given a negative sign, as it were. It is not to be taken at its face value. It is only a way of seeing things, and what is more, a wrong way of seeing things, a distorted way of seeing things, a cognitive misconstrual, and not how things really are. The problem with blanket assertions is that their mesh is too large. As Montaigne once put it, tout jugement en gros sont lâches et imparfaits. And many of the instances to which they apply slip through the net. Here it is particularly important not to forget the following. Socrates' blanket assertion means inter alia that the very understanding of soma, of this thing among many other things we usually call soma, is no exception to Socrates' claim. It too is challenged and contaminated by Socrates' blanket devaluation of the cognitive quality of all soma-related perception. As pointed out above, one of the essential components of our usual understanding of the soma, by this at the body, as a thing among many other things, is its cognitive claim, the fact that this understanding sees itself as knowledge and attributes to itself the property of pure cognitive transparency. Put another way, our usual understanding of the soma, by this at the body, claims to provide reliable and undistorted access to reality, so that soma, the thing among other things, is deemed to be a portion of reality in and by itself. But as it turns out, Socrates challenges this claim. Our usual understanding of the soma as a thing among other things has nothing to do with reality. It has nothing to do with the view of a cognitive witness, as it were, who sees things as they are, as they really are, i.e. who sees them with no significant distortion that would compromise the cognitive value of what he sees. According to Socrates, this whole understanding of the soma as a thing among things is rooted in the very point of view, the validity of which he calls into question. In other words, it is the exact opposite of the cognitive witness it pretends to be. Thus, what Socrates says strikes at the roots of our usual understanding of soma and pulls the rug from under its feet. Now, this changes the relation between soma as a thing among things and soma as a particular kind of overall perception of life and reality, i.e. Socrates' innovative understanding of the word. As long as the former remains unchallenged and keeps its validity, it acts as a point of reference for the latter. In other words, soma as a thing seems to be prior to soma as a particular kind of overall perception of reality. The former is substantive, as it were, and the latter adjective. So, even when one becomes aware of Socrates' new notion of soma, even then one tends to understand the overall perception this new notion stands for as something belonging to soma, the thing, or as something resulting from it, namely as the kind of view one is inherently inclined to take because one has a soma or is a soma. In short, as long as our usual understanding of soma as a thing remains unchallenged and keeps its validity, the key to soma in Socrates' new sense seems to lie in soma as it is usually understood. And this is what the objection we are discussing here is all about. But Socrates' comprehensive claim about the non-cognitive character of all our soma-related perception turns all this upside down. It makes no exception for the key understanding of soma as a thing among many other things. It makes no exception for the reader either. It makes no exception. His claim concerns everything and everyone. That is, his claim is that what we see as a soma itself is by no means the soma itself it pretends to be. It is only a way of seeing things, and what is more, a wrong way of seeing things, a distorted way of seeing things, a cognitive misconstrual, and not how things really are. And the same holds good for all the other things, but is of the whole framework of understanding to which they belong. In other words, what we take to be the very reality of the soma itself, presenting itself to a cognitive witness, is but the correlate of a particular kind of overall perception of life and reality, i.e. the correlate of what Socrates' new notion of soma is all about. And what we take to be a point of reference outside of this particular kind of overall perception of life and reality turns out to be nothing more than one of its essential components. We can express this by saying that in Socrates' view, soma is first and foremost the world according to soma, the understanding of reality in which one's soma, i.e. a certain kind of understanding of one's soma, a certain view of one's soma, is the be-all and end-all of what appears to us. So that the soma as a thing among others ceases to be prior to the world according to soma, it turns out to be only one of its contents. That is, the soma as a thing among others ceases to be substantive, while the world according to soma ceases to be adjective and becomes substantive. It should be noted, however, that in Socrates' view, his new substantive element is characterized by its total lack of cognitive value. It is trapped in its own inefficacy and unable to determine within what framework of reality it is actually taking place. In short, soma is first and foremost a cognitively defective way of seeing things, a point of view, if you will, provided that this concept is taken to include the idea of a very serious cognitive flaw. This is a decisive point. On the one hand, whether the reader is aware of it or not, he or she places him or herself in the perspective of a cognitive witness in the above-mentioned sense. This is, as it were, our default mindset. And on the other hand, everything depends on the qualitative quality of the point of view from which a reader interprets Socrates' words on soma and psyche, i.e. everything depends on whether the cognitive quality, i.e. the reader's tacit claim to be a cognitive witness, is sound. Now, if one assumes that soma and psyche can mean only one thing, namely what our usual way of seeing things is able to understand by these words, there is a serious possibility that one remains trapped in the kind of cognitive misconstrual Socrates so vividly describes, and that one interprets Socrates' words, and in particular soma and psyche, hosper dia hairmu. Thus, the reader is not spared the challenge to his or her own cognitive claims. In the final analysis, it is all about him or herself, tua res agitur, and not least about the very point of view from which he or she is interpreting Socrates' words. Or to be more precise, it is all about the possibility that this very point of view is as cognitively flawed as Socrates describes it. Plato's Phaedo is saying to the reader, if the cap fits, wear it. To sum up, the point is that soma can be more than just one more object for the cognitive witness the reader imagines himself or herself to be. The reader himself or herself, his or her reigning point of view, so to speak, and this also means the point of view from which he or she interprets Socrates' words on soma and psyche, may turn out to be soma in Socrates' sense. And on the other hand, this means that psyche too can turn out to be more than just one object, just another object for the cognitive witness the reader imagines himself to be. Psyche may turn out to be all about a change of the reader's point of view, a change in nothing less than his or her own way of seeing everything. Hence, Socrates' blanket evaluation of all soma-related, i.e. of all our usual perception, calls into question not only other cognitive claims, but also the two key notions in Socrates' words, soma and psyche. They too are in need of cognitive repair and can be adequately grasped only if one leaves behind what the soma in Socrates' new sense pretends to know about them. Whatever we understand by them before serious cognitive repair has taken place is only the soma, that is at the psyche, seen through the filter of cognitive misconstrual, or as Socrates puts it, hosper dia heu. What has now been said about the soma as a world according to soma, thou, could be misleading. In order to avoid misunderstandings, it should be made clear that none of this means that in Socrates' view, soma is only a point of view, a cognitively flawed way of seeing things, not a reality. That is, that there is no thing, no reality of some kind, underlying what we have termed the world according to soma, a thing or a reality that is responsible for this cognitively flawed way of seeing, whether it's set for this point of view, and plays the role of its seat or location. In the final analysis, Socrates' notion of soma does not exclude this possibility. But the point is that if there is such a thing, it is not the thing among things we are acquainted with. It is not the cognitively flawed, ready-to-wear of our usual perception. It is not the soma-related perceptum we are used to, the body as it is known to us. It is something else that remains unknown to us as long as we are trapped in the cognitively defective way of seeing things Socrates' soma stands for. In other words, if we take soma to mean a particular kind of reality which is responsible for the cognitively defective perception we are talking about, then the point is that this reality is as inaccessible to our usual perception, i.e. to the soma in Socrates' sense, as the psyche and indeed everything else. And it should be borne in mind that this means more than the fact that the reality in question is a thing of unknown nature, in the sense that we do not know its specific features. It is much more complicated than that. As a matter of fact, the point is that in the final analysis, the very notion of thing or reality is called into question. According to Socrates' blanket evaluation of our usual way of seeing things, this core notion, thing or reality, is as cognitively flawed. It has just as little to do with real knowledge and aletheia as everything else in our usual perception. So that paradoxically enough, to discover the soma in this sense, to find out whether there is some kind of reality which is the center of our usual perception of things, and to determine its nature, is a task not for the soma, but for what Socrates calls psyche. And this brings us to the psyche. The key point for understanding what Socrates' psyche stands for is his claim that the world according to soma fails to live up to its cognitive claims and is anything but real knowledge. Now, our being able to perceive these, our being able to pursue knowledge, to search for the missing knowledge, our ability to relate to it and perhaps to acquire it, is what Socrates' psyche is all about. In other words, psyche in Socrates' sense has to do with what, paraphrasing his words in the Phaedo, might be called cognitive apodemein, cognitive departure, cognitive change of place, cognitive going abroad. In other words, psyche is all about addressing our cognitive flaws. It is all about cognitive improvement. We could be trapped in a cognitive misconstrual. We could be, as Socrates puts it, bound fast and glued fast to it, to such an extent and in such a manner that we had absolutely no idea of this fact, i.e., neither of being trapped in the cognitive misconstrual, not that there is something beyond, a cognitive beyond, so to speak. But according to Socrates, this is not us. Trapped as we may be in what he calls the soma, we still have the ability to notice this, that truth is elsewhere than or hidden by what appears, that real knowledge remains unattained, and to relate to whatever lies beyond. In short, we are not doomed to remain trapped in the soma, as he points out. We are capable of logismos, thinking, reasoning, and synthesis. We can make the leap from soma in Socrates' sense to something else, either to the missing knowledge or, at any rate, to something closer to knowledge. Secondly, it is also important to bear in mind that the cognitive apodemein we are talking about, the cognitive apodemein Socrates' psyche stands for, does not necessarily take place once and for all, in a single move, as if knowledge, the real knowledge Socrates' notion of psyche is all about, rose fully formed like Athena out of Zeus' head. For on the one hand, the world according to Soma is made up of many components, and there can be a cognitive apodemein with respect to some of them, while others, and indeed the vast majority of them, remain perfectly unchanged and intact. And on the other hand, the fact that one starts to notice that one's usual understanding of something is cognitively flawed does not necessarily lead directly to real knowledge of the thing in question. More often than not, it is only the start of a lengthy and indeed non-linear, eventful and tortuous process. Thirdly, as pointed out above, Socrates speaks of a blanket devaluation of our usual perception of everything, and this means much more than just some occasional cognitive apodemein, only now and then, here and there. In other words, it is not just a question of a few more or less isolated changes of view. Socrates seems to mean something much wider, and indeed nothing less than a change of the whole picture, affecting pretty much all elements of the world according to Soma. We can also express this by saying that Socrates' psyche stands not for an archipelago of sporadic changes of view, but for something massive, for something on a large scale, for a real boom of changes of view, but a set of cognitive improvements that tear everything apart. Socrates' psyche stands for all this, not just for real knowledge, which is as it were its goal, but for the whole realm of changes of view we are talking about, from the moment one starts to second-guess significant components of the cognitively flawed, ready to wear of our usual perception, the world according to Soma, to the final acquisition of real knowledge, assuming that such a thing is something dunaton anthropo. Psyche stands for this whole realm of cognitive reassessment and cognitive improvement, for the whole process of this cognitive migration, as it were, from start to finish. We cannot discuss this matter in full detail here, but there is something we should bear in mind about this. As pointed out above, the psyche in Socrates' sense is also closely connected with a change in what we have termed the central thing, but this is the main thing, the focal point of non-difference around which everything else revolves.